My name is Andrea Jenkins. And first of all, I want to thank you all for being here. I lead borrower learning and education here at Ascent. I was saying that I have a background in student success and have worked with thousands of students and families across hundreds of institutions on topics like choosing a school, starting college successfully. We also provide a handful of support here at Ascent for our borrowers in areas of job search, career readiness, and financial wellness. This session here today is focused on financial wellness and planning, and we'll be really focused on the moment when college starts to feel really financially real. It's when those first bills hit, and then you start to see a lot of early expenses show up close together. So my goal here today is not to overwhelm you with a ton of information. It's to help you feel more grounded in what to expect and what to plan for first. So today we are not just going to be talking about tuition. We've held a handful of sessions just like this about tuition, comparing cost of schools, how to evaluate financial aid packages. If you are interested in those webinars, we will share out links to some of those and follow-up communication. But today is really about how tuition, books, setup costs, food, transportation, and how the timing of how the funds will hit in those first few weeks impact your overall plan and your budget. In my time working with students and families, one of the biggest things I've noticed is that a lot of families who might be new to the college experience, or maybe it's been a while since you've kind of gone through some of this, if you have older kids, or maybe you're a parent who went to college years ago and are kind of entering the space again for the first time, is that they feel really off guard when the year starts. And it's not because they don't have a plan in place. It's not because they don't have the financial setup ready. It's often because they don't realize how many things hit at once, how releasing of funds works. And so that's really what we're going to dig in today. A lot of students and families think that the bill hitting and paying tuition is the big financial moment. And that's a part of the puzzle, but in reality, the bigger stress point is often the period right after you pay the bill. As the semester is getting started, when there are several smaller but necessary costs that show up before finances have totally stabilized. So that's what we're going to be diving a little bit more in today. So first, there are really three outcomes I want for you by the end of today's session. First, I want you to know what your full cost looks like, not just your bill, but how you're really thinking about all the other pieces that come into play. The tuition bill is important, but it's not the complete picture of what it takes to start the semester well. Second, I want to make sure that you're really strongly prepared for the first 30 days. As I mentioned, working with families over the years, this is where I really see the most pressure tend to show up. And third, I want you to know where some of those timing gaps come into place so that you're not blindsided if the money and expenses don't cleanly line up with one another. I know that everyone has different finances, and I do want to note that being prepared and being able to cover upfront costs doesn't mean you need to be wealthy. It doesn't mean you need to have a large amount of savings. It's really just about understanding the sequence of expenses so you know what to expect, so you can start to build a plan now. When you understand what is coming, what is due first, and what decisions matter most, you can set yourself up for success. So students and families typically feel more confident when they stop trying to solve for the whole semester at once or thinking about just the tuition cost. And they're set up for success when they instead focus on that sequencing. What is due first, what can wait, and what is essential from day one. So this is really where a lot of families get tripped up. It's not because they misunderstood the total cost or what money they needed to have. It's often because they assume that money being a part of the plan means that all of the money is ready when they need it. What I've seen over and over is families with a solid plan still get tripped up, and the challenge hits when everything doesn't line up. Colleges don't always bill and disperse everything in the rhythm that families might expect. So a bill can become due before classes start. Refunds, and I'll dive more into specifically what that means here in a moment, but refunds may not land until after classes begin. And in between those two moments, students still need to function academically and logistically. So that's why today I really would like to create a little bit of like a a mindset shift, where you're not just looking at, do I have enough money for this semester or the year, but you're really thinking about what has to be paid, when does it need to be paid, and when will all of my money be available and usable. So I really want to spend a lot of time talking about the first 30 days. And the reason those first 30 days matter so much is that this is where financial timing can start to impact academic momentum. I talk about this a lot because my background is in student success, and I have seen how finances can really impact getting started really, really strong in the semester. I've seen students wait for refund money before buying books, which makes sense when money is tight, but sometimes the book that they need to purchase is not just a book. It includes a software system, a homework or quiz platform, and if they have to wait 2 to 3 weeks for a refund, they might already be behind on assignments or participation points by the time they get access. So some of the early expenses are not just nice to have or even logistical, they can really directly affect how strongly a student can start their college journey. What may seem like a small delay in week one of the semester can turn into a bigger problem by week three. And so we'll get really into the planning here in a moment. But if students can really only prioritize a few things early, required academic materials really should be near the top of the list, especially if the class uses anything like interactive software or graded digital assignments. Um, so one of the things I think we really want to look at is what exactly tends to hit before the semester starts and what hits after. Um, what I tend to do here is try to separate things out into the costs that need to be handled before the semester begins, and then the costs that show up once classes are underway. So before school starts, you're usually looking at really big visible charges and the things you've probably been thinking about since you decided where you're attending. These are the really big visible charges like tuition, fees, maybe housing if you're living on campus, meal plans. You might also be thinking about new technology or equipment. Um, then within the first 30 days, a different set of costs start showing up. It is likely that you might be looking at things like books, maybe course materials. You might also be looking, if you're living on campus or thinking about commuting, groceries, transportation, maybe even some of the personal basics that you need to have covered while you're in school. And all of that matters because those first 30 days of costs can really start to add up. And some of them feel like you might be able to spread them, but they might actually be more of day one costs. Again, I mentioned books already as a really solid example of that. When money is tight, I have seen students wait to buy books until refunds hit. But if, again, classes use any kind of software or online platform tied to the book, you may be missing some really critical assignments. So as you're looking at a lot of your finances, the question starts to become not what will I need? It's actually a matter of what needs to be handled up front, and then what do you have flexibility on down the road. So that's also where doing a little bit of checking up front can help to save you some stress later. As classes get started, and maybe even prior to classes get started, if you have access to things like your course syllabi early on, that can help you evaluate what your options might be for books or course materials. You might be looking at renting a book, maybe borrowing from the library, buying used. Or you may have more specific information about whether you really do need to buy a new book because the professor is using a very specific edition, or again, their software or something tied to the course material itself. One of the best ways to stretch money without falling behind is to figure out early which academic materials are flexible and which ones are not. So students can get into trouble when they assume that certain costs can wait, because be what they might be putting in jeopardy is the fact that they need immediate access to materials. So once you know what truly has to be covered before classes start and what is likely to hit in those first few weeks, you can start building a plan around timing instead of just reacting to things as they come up. So, up to this point, I've been talking about why this feels hard, really wanting to emphasize, the different timing gaps that you'll see. But now I want to show you how things actually work and some of the key shifts in understanding how the money actually moves through the school into your hands, because that's what can help the timeline start to click and feel a little bit more real. So when funding comes in, it may not hit your account as spending money. So if you are leveraging things like financial aid or student loans, that money first gets applied to your bill. So it helps to cover things that show up in that kind of line item that you need to pay the school. It might be tuition, housing, meal plan. Then, if there is any money left after that, that's usually what gets released back to you. But usually, what happens is that that money comes a little bit later. The school has to apply all the money, they have to ensure everything is finalized. So, what ends up happening is that your bill gets taken care of first, but the things that you need day to day, like books, food, transportation, those are things you need cash for or money for, but that you may not have access to until the funds get released. So that's why mapping out all of this matters. It's not just about knowing what expenses you'll have. It's about making sure you're taking that timing into account. So I've worked closely with students and families on this. I like to start by thinking about the first 30-day window. So what's already covered through your bill, and what are the things that you're going to need to pay for out of pocket? Then you layer in the timing. When is that bill due? And when might money start to come back to you? And then what do you need to cover in between those two different points? So that's usually when people have this like, uh-oh moment. But if you're planning, instead of an uh-oh, it becomes an aha, because you can clearly spot what needs to be handled up front versus what actually lines up a little bit later. So the biggest disconnect I see in thinking is thinking my aid covers it, and then getting surprised when you might still need cash for those first couple of weeks. Um, the so many families I've worked with over time have a plan in place, but the timing is different than what they expected. And so that's why it's really important to kind of map those pieces out so that you can actually see the gap. And once you can see that, you can start to figure out your plan to move forward. Um, and then that's when you might need to evaluate, how do you cover that stretch in between. So again, once you've mapped it all out, you might be looking at it going, okay, we need to figure out how we're going to cover the expenses during that time. And the first thing I really want to drive home is that there's no right way to do this, or no one right way to do this, because not everyone is starting from the same place. So what tends to work best is matching the approach to the type of cost. So for example, let's maybe say you're not waiting on a refund. You plan to cover some of your tuition cost out of pocket, or maybe you're planning on leveraging either family employment, student employment, on-campus employment. Um, some families might be looking to payment plans to help. Um, Payment plans can help to spread the cost over time instead of having to cover all of your expenses up front. So leveraging something like a plan might help you to free up some of your money to focus on out-of-pocket things we talked about. So you're not using all of the money you have set aside up front. You're able to take some of that money, apply it to books, food, move in, getting set up. And then you can spread your course payments out, or your tuition payments out over time. For some of those out of pocket expenses, some families and students use income, maybe they rely on support. And sometimes it's just about deciding ahead of time how those pieces are going to be handled. If this is something that as a family you haven't discussed yet, it can be really beneficial to have that conversation up front, discussing who is covering what and when it's a good time, or in maybe even a matter of who's covering what and when. So sometimes families will have a setup where maybe parents pay for things up front, but expect to be paid back through the reimbursement process, or the refund process. Um, and the reason I like to talk about all of this now, I know that June can feel really far away from maybe August or September when the semester approaches. But we like to see this conversation now with families because we want to give you time to plan. If you have any flexibility in your budget to set aside additional cash now, or maybe even leverage some of like a summer job or something like that, it can help to have those 2+ months, to plan rather than scrambling in August. I realize savings is not always necessarily something that is a luxury for everyone. But again, like to just be able to seed that if possible. Um, I will say, just kind of like as an insider tip, payment plans are often one of the most underused tools I see. If families are new to the higher education landscape, they may not know that this is an option, but they really work best if you use them up front. They can help you avoid things like financial holds on your account or things that may trip you up as the school year gets started. So once you know how you're planning and how to handle those early costs, there are a few small decisions you can make up front, that will start to make the start of the semester feel a whole lot more manageable. So once you kind of have your general plan in place, you've mapped everything out, there are a few decisions, that you really want to think about as you head into those first few weeks. First, if a payment plan is something that you might use, it's worth setting that up early. Those deadlines can pass quickly, and it's a lot easier to do all of that before a bill is due, than when you're already under pressure and you're in the start of your college journey. Second, take a few minutes to confirm when the money will actually be available to you. So you don't just need to know what's been awarded. Sometimes it's helpful to know how the award works, and when you can actually use it. That one step alone can make the rest of your plan so much more realistic because you're not just guessing about timing. And third, if borrowing is a part of your college payment plan, whether it's federal student loans or private student loans, trying to make that decision, about whether or not you're borrowing and how much to borrow is great to do now rather than when you're up against a deadline. I have seen a lot of families when things feel tight, or they're stressed. It's really common to just go with whatever amount is available, whatever interest rates are available, because you're just looking for a quick solution. Giving yourself time to evaluate your options, is really important. It can help you avoid over borrowing, which is borrowing more than you actually need, for that early gap. And so, a simpler way to think about this is to use your plan to get a rough number first. What do you actually need to get through tuition payments in those early few weeks? And then, if you are borrowing, borrow to that. You don't necessarily need to accept or borrow the maximum amount you're offered. And if you're deciding between options, especially with private student loans, focus on some of the basics. How much do you need? What does the cost look like over time? And whether or not repayment fits with what you can realistically expect after school. Um, I'm stuck there. There we go. So we're getting to the end here. These are quick sessions. They're meant to be bite-sized and hopefully helpful. But as we wrap up, I really want to bring this back to one practical question. What do you actually need to know next? At this point, I would really focus on three things: get a realistic estimate, understand your timing, and make a plan for what needs to happen first. So that means getting past the headline number, filling in the details about what actually impacts your first few weeks. And if and when you talk to your school, I wouldn't just ask about what's covered or what your specific aid package looks like. I might ask questions specifically about what gets billed directly, when money becomes available to you, You can get a lot of clarity from questions that help you understand what's already built into your bill, what you'll need to cover yourself, and when each of those things typically happens. You can also ask questions about typical cost of course materials, things like that. And the reason all of this matters is because once you know those details, you can stop guessing. You can decide what needs to be handled before the semester starts, and what can potentially wait a little bit longer. Um, I will say one area I'd really encourage students to ask about, think about, is, some of those expenses that come up over time. I've worked with a lot of students where they're looking at things like meal plans, dining dollars, any flexible cash that kind of works on a balance basis. I would ask a lot of questions about that. If part of the balance can be used for things like snacks, coffee, laundry, it can disappear pretty quickly if you're not paying attention, especially if you don't have budget to add more later. It can be really good to sit down and think about what you'll need over the course of the semester, and start to plan that out. It gets really easy to start swiping your card, and running through your funds pretty quickly. So again, the goal for today isn't necessarily to leave you with a perfect budget. It's to leave you knowing what questions to ask and what pieces of information you need to plan for and what needs your attention first. So again, one of the most useful questions I would drill in on: what's billed directly to my account, and what am I going to need to pay for out of pocket once school starts? That question usually clears up a lot. And if you can get answer to those questions before the semester starts, you're in a much better position to begin the term feeling steady instead of surprised. Also, if you're looking for more tools and resources about paying for college, there are a couple of QR codes up here. You can feel free to scan them, bookmark them. We have tons of tools and resources about paying for school. We also have scholarships. I would really encourage you to take a look at some of the scholarships that we offer. Bookmark this page. We have new scholarships coming out every month, and these are things you can apply for over and over again. They help to alleviate a bit of the cost. I'm going to stop sharing here and open it up for questions if anything is coming in.